Ladies and gents, we are back with another video. We're going to talk about all the recent news in the GME space. We'll go over the increase in the ownership, the utilization, XRT, and what we are currently doing with our portfolios and maybe some more. Justin, what is happening right now?
Right. So the big pieces of news that have caught my attention recently was institutional ownership increasing from 39% to 45%. And where this pulls from is somebody on Superstock sourced a Bloomberg terminal document showing that. Anyways, I find it interesting to show that institutions are buying into GME. Now, this data, I don't think it's completely fresh, but it's not completely stale either. We'll back up. It might be 1 or 2 months old, but the point is that as of 1 or 2 months ago, however, when it was pulled from, you saw institutions, jumping into it. So I find that pretty interesting. Ortex short utilization rate remains reported at 100%. The catch with Ortex is that I think it's a good metric to have, but you don't quite know like where they're pulling it from, and then you have to kind of like verify that with other things because just because Ortex is at 100% doesn't mean there is not a single share of GME that can otherwise be borrowed out there.
Yeah, I think that's good. And if this is only one, if they can only track one sort of exchange and it's 100% utilized, there's other exchanges. That means there could be hundreds of percents actually utilized in total that they just
Yeah.
physically can't track, and we don't know where that data would actually be. The
Yeah.
next Justin really. Oh wait, do you have something to say?
Yeah, just let me just jump in and say one other thing too on that front is that forget what the actual like short interest is from Ortex, okay? Whether it's 100%, who cares? The point is that you've seen this steady, sustained increase, and you've seen the increase stay. And so I'm not necessarily as concerned about what the actual percentage is. I'm much more interested to see the number go up and then the number stay up. That's how I would describe that.
Yeah, now I would really like to see what this data was going back for the past year and a half. What has this data been? What was the utilization for this entire year? Yes, it's at 100% now, but what was it in say April? Was it at 50 or was it at 95? And I think that would make a pretty big difference on where we are today. The next is the XRT, where Justin kind of
Oh,
did some calculations.
yeah, so not my calculation. Someone on a superstonk called it out, but the XRT short interest was reported at almost 1,300%. It's since then dropped down to 500 and change, so went down by half. The problem is that XRT is an open-ended fund. In other words, I believe that to mean that they can issue as many shares of XRT as they want, similar to SLV or similar to GLD if you spend any time roosting in the precious metals world. The point is that if you go back to, let me just pull the numbers one more time, the outstanding shares stay roughly the same because if you have a larger amount of shares outstanding, but the short interest remains the same, the percent outstanding will decrease. But like no shorts have been covered. That's what I'm trying to say. So they're just they're doing financial or not shenanigans. Let me say it. They are managing the financial perception by doing this. So my point is, if you hear someone saying, "Oh my goodness, the short interest on XRT dropped by half, therefore half the shares that were short have been covered," no, that is incorrect. I
Yeah.
would argue. What's correct is that they have changed the amount of shares outstanding to bring down the percent total, and that's what you can do if you're an open-ended fund. But so be it.
Yeah, and then this is kind of what I'm thinking about because we've been hammering down how many catalysts there were this week and next week for a while now, and we have
Oh, and
not
Josh, let's just quickly review the catalysts one more time because I think the big one we're waiting to see is what's going to happen this Friday with
anyway,
OPEX.
OPEC. Yes, but there was a lot of FTD expirings, which are just these are like these XRT type of ETFs that have these dates where they have to start settling these shares. PiFi is a great recommendation if you really want to learn the market fundamentals behind this and how they are taking these synthetic shares and potentially just doing a lot of these financial bonerizations. But so they had all these FTDs expiring last week, this week, and next week. They had then OPEX, and which we have seen some price increases in the past week, but it went from like 100 to 130, which is it's definitely no MOAS, and it's a big run for a stock, but that's not what we're not trying to capture a small gain. We are looking for a astronomical type of asymmetry, which we think we could see. So if we don't start to see these gap ups and this MOAS, what I think MOAS will most likely look like is a series of gap ups and halts throughout the entire day, gap up, halt, and just these firms going bust with a spiraling out of control upward motion with these options being exercised and such. So if we don't start to see that by next Thursday, because this is when all these options will be settled from OPEX because there's no trading on Monday, then I'm going to start rolling my options. I have a few options that expire. That I have some 110 calls that expired Friday on February 18th that I've just been trading around, which my plan would have been to exercise one and then sell the others, but it looks like we will not be in the 200s to 300s where that will be possible unless there's a big day tomorrow or Friday or Friday. But if we don't start to see this price movement by next Thursday, then I'm going to start to roll my June 17th contracts. And that's where my absolute biggest position, the June 17th 680 contracts. What I will do is start to sell those off and roll them back to January of 2023 as the next big catalyst of these FTDs and cycles that all these cycles, a lot of these FTDs are these long cycles that take place on certain dates. And the next cycle is in May. So you don't want these, I personally don't want my biggest position June 17th when the next highest probability of MOS is in May. If it does not happen within the next few weeks, of course it could happen because they are currently expending money throughout throughout the next few weeks. And they're continuously spending money and eventually they're going to run out. But there's a lot of these times where the stars align and the highest probable outcome for something to happen would be in May. And that's why I would roll my contracts back. I personally think if something were to happen, it would happen before that. But you are just trying to position your portfolio in a way where you make the most amount and lose. The goal is not to lose money. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing and thinking about what I'm thinking about. I'll let you know if I actually roll these contracts, when I do, and what strike I would do it. That is more of a 2 weeks from now type of question to ask me.
Yeah. So for everyone following along saying, what the hell is options? If you don't understand options, for God's sakes, don't trade them. Buying
Yeah.
and holding the stock and directly registering, everyone can do that. Everyone probably should do that, or should at least study why they would want to do that. If you're playing with options, and this is the thing that Josh was talking about, and I would probably, follow in his footsteps here, is that you have this time dimension. And so many people, myself included, and Josh, let me speak for you, but I suspect you're probably the same mindset, say, okay, well, listen, we don't know when this is going to pop off, but when it pops off, you're not really going to have time to position. But if you're using options to try to capture what you think is going to happen with GME in terms of a squeeze, the longer you maintain the option position, you have to pay for that in terms of the time that will expire from the option. And so by rolling the contract back, you're basically putting a little bit more money to buy a little bit more time. Now, the cool thing is if you enter an option position when GME is relatively low, like, 100 to 110, and you roll when it's 150 to 170, even if the option contracts like your Junes, for example, even if they're not in the money, they might be closer to being in the money. So you still might be able to roll them for a profit. But again, it's one of those things where you really have to stay on top of this. And if you're not on top of it,
if you are not an
buy and hold.
active
Yep.
and relatively experienced trader, I would not recommend. I mean, if you do have some gambling money, throw it in options. And that's what we recommend to a lot of people. I personally have recommended this to a lot of extraordinarily high net worth individuals because if they're going to Vegas, they're going to spend 20 grand anyway. So I'll explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And sometimes I'll say, okay, yeah, I mean, that's gambling money. I know why I'm doing it, and it's to gamble. And that's how I would recommend it, unless you believe yourself to be an expert. And if you know, by no means are we experts. In fact, I'm probably the newbiest trader alive, but I did that you do not want to mess with theta decay. And if you are going to play these cycles,
Basically trade around your main position if you babysit it. So if you want to trade into money calls, 1 or 2 weeks out, great, go for it. But for a core position to capture MOAS, no, give yourself a lot of time if you're playing with options in that regard, because we don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know what other bullets they're going to have to shoot. You don't know what other shenanigans they can pull. You don't know what kinds of exotic transactions they can go into to otherwise warehouse their short interest to buy another day on their side.
Yeah. And then if you are playing these cycles, which we are, you can potentially massively increase your total position size. Because if you know there's a lot of stuff expiring, say this next week, what we have done is we put some shorter term options on, which are now massively in the money. Then you increase your wealth. What do you do then? Then you can hold the shares. And then let's say you go over a long cycle. Let's say these cycles last a year. You go from holding 100 shares to holding 1,500 shares because you played these cycles and exponentially increased your purchasing power through them, which has been a great experience if you've been on top of them, studying them actively and understanding what's happening. And That is one of the biggest things, because now if we have all these apes that are trading these cycles, and then they're making money from these cycles and increasing their actual shares, and they understand the total value of what this MOAS could potentially be, then you have a lot more firepower to throw at them. And that's kind of what we're doing. And we are hoping, and I personally thought we would have started to see some sparks by now, especially with everything that's happened. Maybe I personally still think there's time within the next month, because there are still quite a bit that is going on. But if we don't see this MOAS style of increase, then I will roll my contracts. At
Yep.
least that is what I'm saying now.
And the other thing I would do is I would also be very particular with the language and say sparks. One of the things Josh and oftentimes will talk about is what happens if the rest of the market goes down, 30%, but GME stays flat. See, I would say, okay, well, of course you want to see it green. Ultimately, you want to see it go up. But when you see this divergence, I see this as an indicator, or not an indicator, but I see this as confirmation that things are moving in the right direction. If the SEC were to come out and suspend trading on GME for 10 days, again, I would see that as, okay, they know something's up. So my point is that, obviously people have probably a very generally agreed upon definition of, oh, number go up, very high number. Okay, of course, Moas is starting. But I think you'll see the outer winds of the coming storm play out in other ways. Again, let's say like GME starting to diverge from the market, even if that means GME staying flat, unboring, and sexy, while the rest of the market goes off a cliff, just for example. So my point is that just GME going green isn't necessarily the only indicator or pre-indicator that most is starting. That's all.
Yeah, and I mean, all we're trying to do is figure out the most probable outcome and make the max amount of gain and show you what we are doing and why we're doing it. So without further ado, please do not take any of this for financial advice, because we are a bunch of rubletons. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time.